Hello, 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 everybody. How are we all doing? I'm doing all right. Love that. Welcome to the Germination Station, brought to you by Milwaukee, who we have some of their amazing tools behind me. Can I get a ooh? Love that. Go check them out. They are by the box office. They've got incredible tools. They've been doing some sharpening workshops today, and they'll be here. If you're coming down tomorrow, they're going to be doing some demonstrations on stage tomorrow as well. But I just am here to welcome you to the first ever Yo Valley Organic Garden Festival. It is the first one, so you here are witnessing history. That is correct. I just wanted to tell you about our little schedule today. We've got Richard Pickett up now to talk about gardening for bees. And then at 4 till 4:45, we have Hugh Frost, and he is going to talk to us about sustainable garden pest management and gardening for wildlife. But for now, we have a man that is smoother than honey. It is Richard, where he first learned beekeeping at secondary school, then following a career in film and TV special effects, don't you know, he now spends most of his time researching, thinking, speaking and writing all about all aspects of bees of all kinds. His book, Beekeeping for Gardeners, won the 2024 Living Now Green Living Award and was shortlisted for the Garden Media Guild Practical Book of the Year Award. He is editor of the UK national beekeeping magazine Bee Craft, and he's also local. And we love a bit of local here in Bristol, don't we? So please go wild and give a warm Yo Valley welcome to Richard Rickitt.
Thank you. That's my comedy entrance then. It's a bit embarrassing. Right, thank you very much. Thanks for coming along. And I'm assuming you want to know all about bees, so I'm going to tell you all about bees if I can. I can't see the screens very well, but I've got one down here. But there are quite a lot of pictures. And I should tell you that I'm fully expecting to be dragged off, because this talk I give is normally about 50 minutes, and I've shortened it down to what should be 30, but I just can't, there are so many things I want to tell you about, and if we get to that point, I'll tell you about it anyway. So we'll see what happens at the end. Right, so you, as gardeners, of course, know that there are lots of different kinds of bees, but I'll just run through the different sorts that you might see in your garden so that you are a bit more familiar with what they may be. So there are about 20,000 species of bee in the world, and they're all divided into 3 distinct types. First of all, we have the bumblebees, and you all know what a bumblebee looks like. They're generally big and fluffy. Quite often they're stripy. We've got about 24 species of bumblebee in the UK. We did have several more, but sadly they've gone extinct, and several of the species we now have are in great danger. So our rarest bumblebee is the shrill carder bee. That now can only be found in 3 very small locations, small populations. The nearest to here is down at the National Trust property, can't remember what it's called, Lights Carey in Somerset, so quite close to here. And there are probably just a few dozen left just there now, so they're getting increasingly rare. Some species you'll only find up on moors, like the bilberry honeybee, which will only live on bilberries. And our largest bumblebee is the great yellow bumblebee, which is like a big yellow flying mouse. It's gorgeous. Once upon a time, it was common around here. Now, if you want to see it, you've got to go all the way up north to the very northerly fringes of Scotland, or to the Hebrides or Orkney. The thing about bumblebees is that they're a cool weather species. They've got woolly coats. That's to keep them warm. They prefer a cooler climate. And as climate is warming, they're getting pushed further and further north. And of course, sadly, they're eventually going to sort of fall off the edge. So I think the future for the great yellow bumblebee is not very good at all. Now, bumblebees are what we call a eusocial species. They live in a community. I'll tell you a bit more about this in a minute, but basically you have several hundred individuals living in a nest, and that nest is headed by a queen. We then have solitary bees, and as their name suggests, they don't live in a nest, they're solitary. Everything about their life they do on their own, apart from the one thing in life where you need a partner. So when they're very young, boy meets girl. When the boy's job is done, they quickly die off. And then it's the females who generally live on their own and do all the work to produce new young. And we have about 280 species, roughly. That number changes a little bit. Of solitary bees in the UK, 250 species of solitary bees in the UK, and they're very, very diverse. They have different lifestyles, and they can look very different. So some solitary bees are big and fluffy, and if you saw one in your garden, you'd probably think it was a bumblebee. Some of them, like this one you can see on the screen now, you might think that's a wasp, but it's not. That's actually a nomad, a type of nomad solitary bee. And those bees, like some species of bumblebees, are cuckoos. They actually wait until another species has built its nest, and then they invade it and kill or suppress the bees that are already there and lay their own eggs and force them to raise their young. So we all tend to think of bees as being very benign and fluffy and cuddly, lovely creatures, but actually, like all aspects of nature, they're red in tooth and claw. Some solitary bees are large, some are tiny. Our smallest solitary bee in this country is called Chelostoma campanularum. That's its Latin name, and Latin names always tell you something interesting. And the interesting part of that name is the second part, campanula. You'll recognize that name. You've got flowers in your garden, probably campanulas. And that's because that particular species lives almost entirely on campanulas. Quite a lot of our bees have a relationship with a single kind of plant or flower. And without that flower, that bee will disappear. So if you've got campanulas in your garden, you may well have this bee. But if you have, I bet you've never noticed it because they're tiny. They're 3 millimeters long, absolutely minute, smaller than an ant. So next year, if you've got any kind of bellflowers in your garden, campanulas, have a look. You may see some little black shiny bees flying around, disappearing inside. When they come out, they'll have a pink or blue or white belly, because that's the color of the pollen in the campanulas. And that's this lovely tiny little bee. And then we have the honeybee, and there's only one species of honeybee in this part of the world. It's called Apis mellifera. It's native to the UK and to Europe. They've been here in this part of the world, we know, for about 30 million years. There are a few other kinds of honeybees around the world, but generally, wherever you go in the world where bees are kept in hives for honey and wax and for the pollination of our plants, certainly on a commercial scale, it's this one bee. So a little bit more detail about the life cycle, starting with the bumblebee. So over winter, the only bumblebee that survives is the queen. So she lives on her own. She hibernates over winter. They usually pick a north-facing wall or part of the garden that's going to stay cold because they don't want to be woken up when it gets warm, if it's sunny for a couple of days in the winter. She will hibernate in there throughout the winter. Then she will wake up in early spring, depending on the species. It could be typically end of January through to about March. She will wake up, and then she wants to establish a nest. So the first thing she will do, she's been asleep all winter, is she needs to find some energy. Bumblebees flap their wings at about 300 times a second, and someone's worked out that would be the equivalent in terms of energy of about 7 Olympic rowers. So they need an incredible amount of energy, and that energy comes from sugar, and that sugar comes from the nectar in flowers. So it's very important early in the year to have flowers that are suitable for queen bumblebees so they can land and find some nectar. Once they've got the energy they need, the next thing they need to do is establish their nest, and inside there they want a supply of food. So different bumblebees nest in different places, but typically it might be an old mouse's nest underground. It could be under a paving slab. Some bumblebees prefer to nest slightly higher up, so it depends on the species. Once they've found a place, they want to create a larder, because of course it's early in the year. They may have come out when it's a little bit warm, but then it may rain or it may snow, it may be cold for several weeks, and they're going to need some food. So the first thing they'll do is collect their source of protein. So it's back out into the garden, and they will visit flowers, and they will collect pollen. Bumblebees have got all that lovely hair. They use it to collect up pollen. The pollen is their source of protein. In fact, pollen is incredible. It's actually, pound for pound, about 40 times more protein than in beef. So pollen is an amazing food. So they collect this pollen, take it back to the nest, and they accumulate it together in a ball, maybe about the size of a marble, and that's their source of protein. Then they need to think about energy. So they build a little cup. We call it a honey pot, but it's not a honey pot because only honeybees make honey. Other species of bee don't make honey, but they do collect nectar. So she'll make a little wax pot, like a little thimble, and then she will visit flowers, suck up the nectar, bring it back, and fill up her pot. She's now got a larder. She's got a pot of nectar, that's her energy, and a ball of pollen for protein. The next thing she will do is make some more wax. The wax is exuded from glands on her abdomen, and she will build a little crown around the top of that ball of pollen, and that's her nest. And inside the nest, she will lay some eggs. And after a few days, those eggs will hatch. But before then, she has to sit on them. Just like a bird on her nest, she will sit on her eggs. She will shiver to produce heat, and the warmth will incubate her eggs. After a couple of days, the eggs hatch, out will come some little larvae, and they don't have to go far for their dinner because they're sitting on it. They will just nibble away on that ball of protein. They will grow very, very rapidly, and after a week or so, they'll be much, much bigger, lovely big fat grubs. They then spin a silk cocoon around themselves, and inside that cocoon, over the next week or so, they go through metamorphosis. And once they've done that, this little squashy grub has melted down to nothing, rebuilt itself, and out comes a lovely furry little bee. And the first bees of the season that come out, and you'll notice this in your garden, first of all, you'll see the big fat queens, then a few weeks later, you'll start seeing little tiny baby bumblebees. The first few bees each year are very small because they've only had a small amount of food to eat. It's the food that the queen brought back for them. But now they go out into the garden and they collect pollen and nectar and bring it back. The queen stays in the nest and lays more eggs, and subsequent generations of bees get larger and larger throughout the year. And then towards the end of the year, the queen lays some eggs which produce males, because up until now, all of the bees produced have been females. So males are produced usually at the end of the year, and new queens are produced. They will leave the nest and mate. And the males just spend the rest of their summer. You can see them out now in the garden, just lazing around on flowers. Their job is done. They spend their last few days sucking on nectar, sunbathing. They cuddle up together at night on flowers. And then bit by bit, over the next few weeks, you'll see them disappearing. And the nice, new, shiny queens will be consuming pollen and nectar and building up their stores for winter. And in the next few weeks, they will start disappearing from the gardens because they are going into hibernation. So that's broadly the life cycle of the honeybee. And now I've got to press this button lots of times because, as usual, I've nattered on and haven't progressed the slides as I'm supposed to. Now, solitary bees, we class them according to the way that they nest. And the majority of solitary bees in this country are miner bees. We call them that because they build their nests as tunnels. They are actually miners. They build tunnels in the ground. Some of them are a few inches into the ground. Some of them are several feet long. It depends on the species of the bee. And there are about 80 species of solitary bees, and you get them in different areas according to the quality of your soil. So some miner bees like to dig and live in sandy soil, some will live in clay, and so on. So the type of bees you have in your area is to some degree dependent on the soil type that you have. So the single females will dig a tunnel, and you may see these in your garden. You may see little tiny volcanoes in your lawn or in your borders with a little hole in the top. Well, that's a tunnel, a nest for a single solitary bee. She'll build a tunnel into the ground. Off the tunnel will be several chambers, and each chamber is a place for a new bee to be produced. So once she's built her tunnel underground, she'll fly off and bring back pollen and nectar. She'll build a pile of pollen. She'll soak it with nectar, so you've got a nice mushy mixture of proteins and carbohydrates. And on top of there, she'll lay a single egg. She'll then seal up that chamber and go off and do the same somewhere else, the same somewhere else, and the same somewhere else. And when she's finished and her job is done, then she usually will die. That's it, that's the end of her. Back in the nest, the eggs will hatch, the larvae will come out, they will eat the pollen and nectar provided for them, the larvae will grow quickly, they will build a chrysalis, and some of them will go through metamorphosis and come out that summer, so you'll have a second generation, and some of them will stay in their cocoon and won't come out until the following summer. Now, if you think about it, building a tunnel underground is a bit of a flawed strategy because, of course, if your babies are going to be in there all winter and it rains a lot, they could drown. It's going to get very wet. So one of the things that some of these bees actually do is they have a gland inside their head and they produce a liquid, a sort of saliva. They lick the walls of the tunnel and the saliva solidifies to form a cellophane. It's literally like the cling film we wrap our sandwiches in. So they line their tunnels with cellophane, seal them at the top, and you've got a perfect underwater bag which will keep your babies dry all through the winter. Some of them produce a cellophane which also has an inbuilt fungicide so that mold can't grow over the winter. Amazing. So we've got about 80 species of miner bees. We've got 8 species of leafcutter bees. Now what these do is they find a ready-made hole in a wall or a beetle hole in an old log, something like that. They will then visit leaves, usually quite shiny, tough leaves like roses. In my garden, they visit the grapevines. They've got very sharp jaws like a pair of scissors. They land on the leaf, they go snip, 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 cut out a perfect circle, roll it up, tuck it between, and they fly off back to their nest like a witch on her broomstick. And when they get to their nest, they unravel the leaf, chew the edges to make it nice and wet and sticky, and then they will knit together several leaves to produce something like a hollow, dried cigar. That's the tube they'll then make their babies in. And then, like the other species of bee, they'll bring in pollen and nectar, lay an egg, build a wall out of leaves, more eggs, more eggs, and more eggs, and they'll keep going until they fill up the tube, and at the end they'll cut out lots of perfect circles which are exactly the diameter of the tube and plug it with those. So that's the leaf cutters. We then have mason bees, and they're not members of a secretive society. They're called mason bees because they build walls. There are several species of these, and they mostly build their nests out of mud. And the most common one is this one you can see here on the monitor. This is Osmia bicornis, called bicornis because it's got two horns, and it uses those horns for collecting mud. So it will fly off to your vegetable patch when you've been watering the veg or find an area of clay. It will use its horns to scoop up the mud. It takes the mud back to its nest, and it lines its nest with mud, and then it will bring pollen and nectar, lay an egg, build a wall, and so on and so forth. And these mason bees are the ones that you're most likely to see if you've got some kind of bee hotel in your garden. And finally, we've got two species in this country which nest in snail shells. Osmia, they're quite rare. Osmia bicolor is one that you can find around here. It's a tiny little bee. It looks like a bumblebee there, but it's very tiny. Osmia bicolor, two colors, black at the front, red at the back, and it finds an empty snail shell. It brings in bits of sand and gravel and produces a saliva, which is like a glue, so it makes a cement out of the sand and gravel. It cements the inside of the snail shell to reinforce it. It brings in pollen and nectar, lays its eggs. It then seals the snail shell when it's full with lots more bits of gravel, pushes the shell over so that the entrance isn't pointing upwards. It doesn't want it to fill with water over winter, and then it brings in lots of little stalks of grass and straw and builds a little wigwam, like a thatched roof over the top to hide the shell from any forms of predators. So that's the solitary bees, and then there's the honeybees, and they are a native species, but they are affected by all sorts of problems, as are other bees, and people often think that to help the bees, they need to keep bees. That's not really the case. Honeybees naturally are tree dwellers. They want to live in a cavity, in a hole in a tree, but we've learnt to keep them in hives. They'll very willingly live in a wooden box we provide them with. And the thing is, honeybees aren't really endangered because there are beekeepers to look after them. We can feed them if necessary, we can treat them, we can breed more if we have to. But of course, the wild bees don't have that. We don't actually know how to breed wild bees or how to feed them or build them nests. They're really on their own, and that's where they're the really important ones that I'd like you to concentrate on in your gardens. So the question is, why garden for bees? Well, it's lovely to see the bees, and we all know that they're having problems. But the reason why it's important for you to think about this is because you are really on the front line as gardeners. As you'll discover in the next few minutes, the natural environment is really very, very poor for bees these days. It's not an easy place for them to live. But gardens are perfect for bees, so you are on the front line. And many species of bee live very locally. You might live, say, around here in a garden, you might find 40 or 50 species of bee, but many of those you won't find 5 miles away or 10 miles away. You might not find some of them again for another 100 miles. So they're very, very localized. And if they die out in your area, that's it, they've gone. That's the end of them, really. We can't reintroduce them, they won't come back. So by looking after the bees you've got and giving them the things that they need, you can support them, encourage them, and actually you'll find you'll get more bees and more species of bee over time. And you can really make a very, very significant difference. They really do need our help. So a little bit of evidence. You may well remember this, certainly the older ones among you. In the summer, if you were driving home tonight, you'd end up getting insects squashed all over the front of your car on your windscreen. Or in the summer, you'd have to close all your windows if you wanted to leave your lights on at night. Otherwise, the ceiling would be covered with black insects as they came in. That doesn't happen anymore, does it? Where are the insects gone? When was the last time anything went splat on your windscreen? It just doesn't really happen anymore. There's been a big survey across Europe over the last 24 years in all the European countries, in the same places each year, in nature reserves actually. They put out lights at night to attract insects, catch all the insects and weigh them. And in 24 years, we've lost 78% in mass of our insects. That's a huge number of insects. And of course, you might be glad that you haven't got to keep washing your windscreen when you drive anywhere in the summer, but the fact that these insects aren't there is bad news. They're canaries in the coal mine. They're telling us there's something very, very wrong indeed. And these little insects might be a bit annoying, but of course they're important too. They're at the bottom of the food chain. They feed larger insects and mammals, invertebrates and birds, and many of these insects pollinate our crops. So the fact they're not there is telling us there's something very, very wrong with our environment. So what is the problem? Why aren't they there? Well, one thing is food, is forage. We've lost 97% of our wildflower meadows since the Second World War. So if I just go back, if you imagine this is how many flowers we had, how many wildflowers we had growing in the UK at the end of the Second World War, that tiny weeny little strip on the end is what's left. And flowers are an important source of food for insects, but also it's a habitat. Many of them make their nests in the hollow stems of various flowers and so on. The countryside generally, we look around us and see all these lovely green fields and think that looks nice and peaceful and natural, but it shouldn't look like that at all. Those fields should really be full of all sorts of flowers, but generally they're not. It depends, of course, on the kind of farm. Most farms might as well be a desert or even covered with tarmac as far as bees are concerned. If you've got a field of grass full of cows or other animals, it's probably a single species of grass which has been planted there. There are no broadweed leaves. And then look at the hedgerows. Hedgerows used to be wide and thick and full of trees and full of life, and full of plants and birds. And hedgerows are among the most important of all natural environments because they're edge lands. If you go into a woodland right into the middle, actually there's not a lot of wildlife. It's usually quite quiet, and you might see the odd squirrel or whatever. The life in a woodland, or in the case of a hedge, is around the outskirts. That's where there is the greatest biodiversity, the most number of plants, and so on. And so by having lost many of our hedgerows, we've lost lots of very, very important habitat. Then we have the issue of pesticides. We've absolutely drenched our agricultural farmland with all kinds of chemicals for the last 60 or 70 years. And of course, these are important for producing all of the food and at a price that we all appreciate, but it's done great damage to our land. And I say pesticides and not insecticides because obviously insecticides kill insects. They're indiscriminate. Put them on a plant or a plot of land, it just kills insects. But other things that you might not think harm insects can harm them as well. So a good example is if you use weed killer in your garden. So if you use something with glyphosate in it, like Path Clear or Weedol, well, firstly, glyphosate is one of the worst chemicals ever created by mankind. But it's not just that you're putting on your garden, because that's the active chemical. There may be 20 or 30 other chemicals in the mix which are put there to help it perform. So a good example is what they call adjuvants, and these are like detergents. And the idea is, if you just put Weedol, if you just put glyphosate on a plant, it will roll off the leaves. You want something else in the mix which will break down the wax and allow the active chemical to get in. So if you squirt a dandelion, it disappears, great. Next year, a dandelion comes up, it's got that stuff built into it because it's sucked it up from the soil where you put it, because lots of this stuff lasts in the soil for years, decades, we don't really know how long. And what happens now is our bumblebee will come along, visit the dandelion, suck up some nectar. It doesn't appear to hurt it, that's fine, it's fine, it will come back lots of times, it will build its nest. But these adjuvants have an effect that no one expected. We've now discovered that it prevents the bees from shivering. So what that means is our bumblebee will build a nest, lay some eggs, sit on the eggs, and then she can't incubate them. They will never hatch. And so that queen and her nest will just sort of disappear out of the equation. And bit by bit, these bees are disappearing through all these sort of unnoticed effects of the pesticides and chemicals we're using on the land. It's not just farmers. We can go into any shop and buy a bottle of something. We don't know what's in it. We don't know how we're going to use it. You know, if you go through Victorian gardening books, they'll tell you how wonderful arsenic is to use in the garden. and we now laugh, but in 50 years' time, people will look back at the things that we've all got in our garden sheds and just think we must have been crazy. We don't really know how long these things last and the effects they're going to have long-term on the environment or us. In some parts of the world, it's terrible. Parts of China, for example, but also in California, where nearly all of our almonds are grown, the use of pesticides on farmland has been so great that there are no pollinators there. There are no insects at all. And the only way to produce a crop in China is that thousands and thousands of migratory workers come up by train every spring and spend a month or two climbing all the trees and pollinating things with feather dusters, because there is no insect life to ensure the pollination of crops. So you're starting to see that farmland, certainly, is a pretty dire place for wildlife generally, but also for bees. But gardens can be a real oasis. I might get in trouble for saying this, but if you took the average 50-acre conventionally farmed field and built 1,000 houses on it, we'd all be very upset, but it would probably be better for nature, because rather than having one big field that's covered in chemicals, you've got 1,000 houses with maybe 1,000 lawns, 1,000 trees, lots and lots of ponds, all kinds of different flowers. Some will be paved, which can be quite good, or there can be gravel. There'll be a bit of plastic grass, but we'll avoid that. So, you know, loads and loads of different kinds of environments and different kinds of plants where different sorts of nature can actually thrive. So I live in the countryside, and I've got bees on the outskirts of Chippenham, and my honeybees, I see them all the time. They all fly into the town, because that's where they can find the things that they need, not the countryside where I keep them. So gardens can be a real oasis, not least because many species of our bee don't travel very far. Honeybees can fly 3 miles. Bumblebees maybe a kilometre. Many solitary bees will never fly more than 10 or 20 metres. So if you've got a reasonable sized garden, your garden is their entire universe. So you can make a real difference in that garden. If you need a practical reason, of course, bees and other insects pollinate our food, our crops. Approximately a third of everything you eat today will have been pollinated, probably by a bee. About another third of everything you consume is reliant on pollination, and that can be things like meat and eggs, because much conventionally, commercially produced products come from animals which are fed on concentrated foods, and they come from plants that have been pollinated by bees. So if we lose our pollinators, we'll basically be left with, we won't starve, but we will basically have, it's the cereals, the grasses. We'll have rice, and barley, and wheat, and maize. That's what we'll all be eating. We won't be having chocolate, we won't be having fruit, we won't be having many of our vegetables, and so on. So we're not going to starve, but it won't be much fun. In your garden, you'll notice the difference if there are more bees, and many plants can be pollinated by wind or by rain. The pollen can be vectored, can be spread in that way, but pollination is much more effective if it's done by bees and other insects. A good example is, for example, broad beans. Farmers grow broad beans in the fields. They're our largest agricultural export. Most of the field beans grown in the UK are exported to the Middle East. If you've been to Egypt or Morocco and had falafel there, it probably came from beans grown here, unbelievably. Now, if you're growing field beans or broad beans in your garden, the bee will visit it, and rather than having 4 or 5 beans in your pod, you might get 6 or 8 beans in your pod. So you'll get an awful lot more beans. Things that need sugar, like raspberries and strawberries, they don't actually produce the sugar unless they've been pollinated by bees. So they make our food much, much tastier and much more nutritious. I'm going to move on a little bit. Raspberry is a classic example. A raspberry is lots of fruit, not one fruit. It needs loads and loads of acts of pollination. And then there's the aspect of pleasure. If you grow things that are beautiful, you love them in your garden, there's pleasure from the fact that you see bees visiting. So what do you need to give bees in your garden? They need pollen, I've mentioned that. They need nectar. They also need somewhere to live. And this is what I really want to get to you. People talk about planting things for bees. It's not just about you being a restaurant, it's a place for them to live. They need different kinds of environment in which to build their nests. So in terms of flower, you need to give them flowers that are pollen and nectar rich. The best way to do that is to get a book and see which kinds of plants are very valuable to bees. Just look for flowers that have wide open flowers. A good thing to do is go to other gardens or your local nursery and see what bees are visiting. So avoid doubles and hybrids. They've been bred for humans to look better from our point of view, but not necessarily to allow the bees in. You need a range of shapes, from daisy-type shapes to foxglove shapes, because bees have different shaped heads, different length tongues. Different flowers fit different kinds of bees. Blues and purples, generally bees go for. Bees can't see red, for example, so naturally not many red flowers are pollinated by bees. And you want large quantities, by which I mean plant in quantities, plant in drifts, have lots of one species of flower together. And something all year round, which is increasingly important. Many of our bumblebees are waking up in the winter when they shouldn't really be awake because of our warming climate. And if there's nothing for them to consume, those queen bumblebees are going to run out of energy and die. So things that flower in the winter are very important. If you want a list of my top recommended plants, come up here at the end, and I've got a book. You can put your email in it. I will send you a PDF with my 100 top flowering plants for bees. So I'm not going to concentrate on these ones at the moment, but I know gardeners never like to hear this. Please grow more dandelions, really, in your lawn. Fill your lawn with dandelions, really essential, and at a time, thank you, when bees need them. Lots of things in the summer. The one thing I'm going to mention here is heleniums and all the late flowering plants. People often say, for bees, you need to plant native flowers. It's not true at all. A bee doesn't care where a flower comes from. There are a few species of bee that have a relationship with a native flower. Without those flowers, it's bad news for that bee. But generally, most species of bee will go to any kind of flower if it's in flower. This summer, we've had a summer where it's been really dry. Most of the nectar in flowers disappeared about the end of June. It's been a terrible summer for bees in terms of nectar. But what's giving nectar now are all those late flowering, sort of American prairie type flowers, the heleniums and sunflowers and rudbeckias and zinnias. That's what you'll see the bees on the garden out there today. So really one of the most important things you can do is plant early flowering plants and late flowering plants. Herbs are very important. They flower a lot, the culinary herbs. I want to mention mint because mint has a hairy stalk, and some bees like hairy plants. In particular, this one here, this is the wool carder bee, and this bee makes its nest from the wool that it gathers from hairy plants. So if you gather Stachys, Stachys byzantina, the lamb's ear with its lovely woolly leaves, this particular species of bee will come along, and the female collects a ball of wool, like a little cotton wool ball, takes it back to where she wants to build a nest, cards it into a nest, and lays her eggs in there. So that's a good fun thing that you can plant in your garden and wait for this particular species of bee to come along. Trees are really important, mostly for early flowering, many of the native trees, maples, sycamores, things like that, and willows. And echoing what I said just now about the perennial plants, increasingly we want things that flower at the end of the year. So many of the oriental types of trees will flower towards the end of the year, and that's increasingly important for bees. And right now, ivy. Ivy is probably the single most important plant in the UK for wildlife generally. And if you look at an ivy bush now, you will see it absolutely covered in honeybees, butterflies getting ready to hibernate for winter, various species of wasps, hoverflies, and you'll even get the ivy bee, which lives only on ivy. It's come up out of its holes in the last few weeks. It will visit the ivy, collect pollen and nectar, build its holes and nests in the ground, and then it will die, and we won't see it again until next year. Beautiful little bee. Quick word about lawns. Lawns, I think, are lifeless, a real waste of space. Apparently, there are 2 million acres of gardens in this country, and about half of that is lawn. That's 1 million acres of lawn, and most of it is just green and good for nothing. Imagine if we had 1 million acres of lawns full of wildflowers for bees. And the great thing about a lawn full of wildflowers for bees, you don't have to mow it as much. And what people are often amazed by is how beautiful it smells. A flowering lawn full of wild native flowers smells incredible for about a month of the year. Really beautiful, fragrant smell. So you can grow native plants, go out and collect the seeds. It's perfectly legal as long as it's not an endangered species. Plant plugs, get them going this time of year. First thing in the spring, scarify your lawn, get some wildflowers in there. And what I do is I mow the lawn in around about March, then I don't mow it again until they've finished flowering about the end of June. Put your lawnmower on a high, put the blade at its highest point, deadhead all those flowers, and then let them flower again. And then by about mid-July, the flowers are all over, and then you can go back to mowing your lawn as normal. So you don't have to be a slave to having a lawn which is looking a little bit ragged once the flowers have gone over. And quite frankly, who wants to spend their Saturday mowing the lawn? That's my kind of gardening, that chap there. That's what you'll see in my garden going on most of the time. The ground is really, really important. What you want is lots of habitats in your garden. So many bees will live in hollow stems or in holes in walls, but you also want to be looking for things like sand, gravel, banks that catch the sun. You want to create as many different kinds of environments as you can in that small space to allow lots of bees to survive and reproduce in your garden. So these are some shots of my own garden. That's just a pile of sand. I scooped it out, and in the south-facing part, because that gets the sun, never seen it before in my garden before, the sandpit mining bee came along to the sand. So if you create these environments, bees will come and visit them, and they will reproduce there. Bee hotels can be good fun. It helps you to see what's in the garden. The key with any kind of bee nest is it needs to be on a south-facing wall. It needs to get as much sun as possible. Lots and lots of holes of different shapes. If you haven't got a bee hotel, just be a human woodworm. Go around the garden with your drill and drill holes in anything that's wood. It could be trees, it could be fence posts, it could be sheds. My friends have stopped inviting me around in the summer because I turn up with my drill. Anything from 2 millimeters to 8 millimeters, you'll get a species of bee nesting in there if it's in the right place. Here are some examples of, you can get creative. You can use buddleia stems, raspberry, anything which will be hollow. The bees can hollow out the pith and they can nest there. I prefer this kind if you're going to put a nest box in there. It's got little drawers that you can pull out. So the first ones you'll see in there in the ear are these, the red mason bees. So there you can see a female. She's got yellow pollen on her belly. She's lined the hole with mud. And if you look at the bottom there, you can see that tunnel lined with mud and divided up into sections, each of which has got pollen and nectar and a single egg in it. So she'll do that along the tube. About a month later, you start getting the leafcutter bees. This is a photo I just took out of my office window. She's cutting some grapevine, carrying it back to the nest, and there you can see all the little leaf-covered cocoons that she's made. And this particular type of nest box has a little loft. I filled it with a load of reeds that I took from a local stream, dried reeds, absolutely tiny. And in there, I get the yellow-faced bee, which is this little tiny one here. You've probably got yellow-faced bees in your garden, but I bet you've never noticed them, because here is a little example. Here's an nasturtium. The big, fat, hairy one in the middle is a buff-tailed bumblebee. The little tiny one on the edge is a yellow-faced bee. So we've all seen those big bumblebees, and we've all thought we'd like to help them and grow more things for them. But keep an eye out for the other bees, because there are a lot more bees in your garden than you probably know. I have a friend who lives near Cabot Circus, absolute centre of Bristol, really small garden. He has over 60 species of bee in his garden. 10 years ago, it was 20 species. He did the things that bees need, created an environment, provided what they wanted, and now he's got this amazing abundance of bees. So wherever your garden is and whatever you've got in it, and however you garden, you can create a place that's safe for bees and where they can thrive. And it is the most pleasurable, for me, the most pleasurable thing you can do in garden, not just to plant a flower, see it grow, and enjoy that bloom, but to look out of your living room or kitchen window and actually see that your garden is alive. It's not just full of pretty flowers, but you will see little golden glints as all the bees you've invited in visiting your garden. It's just the most pleasurable thing that you can imagine. Now, sadly, I've run out of time. You could probably tell I'll go on for a lot longer if you give me a chance and tell you a lot more. So if there's time for questions, there might be time for one or two. Yeah?
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Richard a massive round of applause, first and foremost. Lovely. We have our crew that are going to pass you a microphone. So put your hands in the air, and we'll start in the middle, and then we'll go to this lady in the green dungarees, and then we'll come down here next.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very inspiring. So if you don't use glyphosate, what do you use, like for bindweed and things that are very persistent?
Bindweed, sadly, is just boring. You just have to keep pulling it up or putting, listen to Bob Fowlerdew, put some carpet on it or what have you. My garden used to be infested with bindweed, and I just keep on pulling it up, keep on top of it, and it gradually it disappears slowly. You can burn weeds out, and a lot of the time it's just a case of getting on your hands and knees. But we just have to get out of that mindset where we think there's a slight problem, I can apply an instant solution. Unfortunately, it isn't as easy as that, but it is doable. Well, just look at the gardens here, for example. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Richard. Thank
Hi.
you for that. That was the best talk of the weekend for me, so it was brilliant. The solitary bee nest, you mentioned 2 mil to 8 mil. I'm taking it that's width rather than depth.
Yeah.
And is there a specific depth it should be, or should it be open both ends?
No, it shouldn't be open both ends.
Yeah.
So if you're building a bee nest, anything between 2 and about 8 millimetres, the smaller size holes can be narrower, so shorter. So you could just use, if you buy a 2 mil drill bit, they're normally quite short, and that's actually quite fine. If you're doing the larger ones, they need to be longer, at least 6 inches. So you need to be away to B&Q or whatever and get yourself some long shanked drill bits. You want them to be nice and deep, and definitely with a sealed end. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll just go just in front of you, and then we'll go to the lady in blue black there. Thank you so much.
Hi.
What is your theory on the fact that people are saying that one of the things that are killing the bees at the moment is the fact that their commercial bees are in beehives are being fed high fructose corn syrup, and they're saying that this is killing all the bees?
Yeah. So first of all, in the UK, people don't use high fructose corn syrup. That's used by commercial bee farmers in the States that have hundreds of thousands of hives. In the UK, honeybee keeping is generally fairly small scale. Even our commercial beekeepers are really small scale.
Isn't most honey we get from the USA?
Most honey that we consume in this country is from China. And that's actually the biggest problem. 95% of supermarket honey has Chinese honey in it. You don't know that, and often the importers don't know it. The Chinese produce masses of honey. They take it before it's ready. They artificially age it by taking the water out in machines. The problem is that Chinese bees all have a disease called American foul brood. This kills our bees. It's terrible. It's horrible. And what the solution in China is they feed all their bees on sugar syrup laced with antibiotics, so they keep their bees alive. Their bees produce honey which have the spores of this disease in it. The Chinese then sell this honey onto the world market incredibly cheaply. Other countries like Argentina and Brazil that have big beekeeping industries buy this honey, mix it in with their own, and then sell it on to us. Now, when the Chinese gather their honey, they put it through extremely fine filters. This isn't to remove the disease, it's too small. It doesn't get rid of the disease, it removes the pollen. And if you take pollen out of honey, you've basically got just sugar syrup. You're removing the good stuff. They take the pollen out. It's called American foul brood, the disease. They take the pollen out because the pollen is its fingerprints. If you can look at pollen in a microscope, and honey in a microscope, you can see all the pollens in it, and you can tell exactly where it comes from. Even in the UK, you can tell which region in the UK. So the Chinese remove the evidence. You can't tell where this stuff comes from. It's then mixed with other kinds of corn syrups and all kinds of chemicals and whatnot, sold onto the world market. We then buy it in our supermarkets. 95% of supermarket honey has been found to have Chinese honey in it with this disease in it. So if you buy a jar of that honey, first of all, it's not great honey. Secondly, if you throw that jar out, it's not properly washed up in the recycling, and our honeybees find it, our bees will get that disease, and by law, they have to be killed. So this is causing all sorts of problems. Firstly, it's killing our bees. Secondly, it's affecting the livelihoods of beekeepers, which is a bad thing. But in the States, many beekeepers are going out of business. They can't afford to make honey anymore. And their agricultural system, and the agricultural systems in large parts of the world, are totally reliant on commercial beekeepers bringing lots of honeybees to pollinate the monocultures. So by buying this cheap honey in the supermarket, we're actually ultimately affecting our food security. So I know that buying honey from your local beekeeper is more expensive, but I really would encourage you, for lots of different reasons, only to buy honey from your local beekeeper. You know where it's been, you know where it's come from.
Lovely. We've got time for one more question back there.
Hello.
Hi.
Does it help nectar production if we water our flowering plants during a drought?
Okay, so yeah, obviously that's quite contentious because of water resources and so on, but certainly I grow certain plants for beauty and some really just because I want them to be basically a tap full of nectar for my bees. And this year I noticed that they just weren't being visited. They look beautiful, but why aren't the bees visiting them? There's no nectar. They've got to draw nectar from the soil to produce, water from the soil to produce that nectar. So if you want them for that reason, then let's water them, water some of them. Some plants with much longer roots will continue giving nectar. So, for example, brambles have a lovely long root. Grow more of those because they'll continue flowering from June till October. And even if it's a drought, bees will still get something from them.
Thank you so much. That's all we've got time for. But just a quick question from me, Richard. Our theme at Yo Valley Festival tomorrow is about inspiring the next generation of gardeners. Have you got, you sort of alluded to it in your talk, but have you got some tips for some children or young adults in the room to really get them started in beekeeping?
So, well, beekeeping is probably a slightly different thing. It's quite complicated and you've got to be quite serious and you do need to go on a course and so on, or buy a good book. But although most of my book is actually about gardening and the plants you can do for other bees. But what I would suggest is get a bee hotel. Try to avoid the ones that they sell in supermarkets and so on, because they really generally aren't get one from a good supplier, a nature supplier, specialises in nature stuff. The tubes are long enough. You can get ones with kind of cardboard tubes that you can soak and then unravel. So you can see your bees coming in. You can share the pleasure with your children or grandchildren of watching the bees coming in. They're bringing in pollen. You can take them to the flowers, and so this is how they're collecting it. And then when they've sealed up the tubes, you can soak them and unravel them, and you can take out the cocoons, and you can keep them in your fridge over winter. And then in the spring, you bring out these cocoons, you can put them in a little wooden box or something with a lid on it, and you can actually watch them, see them emerging. In fact, wait till the first one's emerged in your fridge in a jam jar, and then put the rest of them out, and you will see the bees coming out, and then you will see that second generation visiting your flowers and going back to the bee hotel, and then you'll have even more bees the following year. It's a lovely thing to do with children, so, or as a grown-up, it's a lovely thing to do as well. So I'd encourage you to do that.
Thank you so much for that, Richard. Don't panic if you want to ask Richard any more questions. He's now heading to our bookshop at 3:15, so you can talk to him there. We've also, if you're still into bees and want more all things bees, we've got Jean Vernon at the Yurt at 3:30, and she's going to be doing a bee safari, very exciting. Here next at the Germination Station, we've got Hugo Frost, and he's doing a talk on sustainable garden, pest management, and gardening for wildlife. And then at the Hive at 3:15, they're doing a talk on can we demystify planet-friendly gardening. That's with Nigel Corks, Georgie Newbury, Kate Bradbury, and Sally Morgan. But for now, please give a massive Yo Valley thanks to Richard Rickitt.
Thank you.